Hello, everyone. This is part 1 of session 22 of Pre-Socratics to Augustine, also called History of Philosophy 1. We are still talking about Epicurus, and today we discuss a question that closely relates to the issues we already discussed about, on the one hand, the question, can atomism account for the richness of the world? And on the other hand, what is Epicurean epistemology and how does Epicurus think of sense perception? So we are bringing together these two topics that we already discussed. Now, if you ask yourself whether atomism can account for the richness of the world, one way to think about it is to ask, well, can it account for immaterial entities such as the soul or divinity? And that is an important route of inquiry, which we discussed when we talked about Aristotle's objections. Another line of inquiry here is just to look at, as it were, the richness of experience of the world and the many qualities and properties that things seem to have. And to ask, well, how is it that, for example, the greenness of a leaf or the sweetness of an apple is explained by the theory that there are only atoms and void? And that is, for the Epicureans, almost a kind of battle cry. Only atoms and void is kind of the short version in which it is reported in some sources as a kind of really revolutionary and rebellious idea. Okay, so what we want to talk about then is, how does Epicurus account for the different properties and qualities and features that seem to come with what we may call compounds? And by that I mean macroscopic entities in the world, such as a stone. A stone is a compound of atoms. And in order to think about atomism, we can distinguish between, on the one hand, atoms and void, which is, as it were, the microscopic structure of things, or the microscopic what it is of things. And then macroscopic compounds, like people and trees and stones and so on. The proposal is that there is a distinction to be made between, on the one hand, so-called fixed attributes, and on the other hand, mere accidents or accidental properties. What is a fixed attribute? Both atoms and compounds have these fixed attributes. The atoms have tangibility, size, weight, and shape. Every atom has these 4 fixed attributes. It doesn't change its shape. It doesn't kind of grow or decrease in size or anything like that. Those attributes are fixed for every atom. And compounds also have some fixed attributes. And what that means is that if such an attribute were taken away, the thing would no longer be what it is. Consider a stone as an example. If the stone no longer had weight, it would no longer be a stone. And that is what it means to say that weight is a fixed attribute of the stone. But there are also accidental properties. So let's say here's the stone and I use it as my paperweight. Now the stone has the property being my paperweight. But that is a property that it can come to have and that it can lose without anything changing in its nature as a stone. So that is what an accidental property is. And the claim is that atoms don't have such accidental properties, only compounds do. So if we are going to explain, as it were, the macroscopic structure of the world, what do we perceive when we look at trees, people, and so on and so forth, we are going to talk a lot about these accidental properties, but we are also talking about some fixed attributes, such as, say, the stone that has weight, and that wouldn't be a stone if it didn't have weight. Now, I want you to think for the homework assignment about one particularly interesting kind of property that we perceive on the macroscopic level, as it were. And that is color properties. We already talked a little bit about sense perception, And now I want you to think more about it, and I want you to use the image that is kind of the image for our class of the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, near the region where Thales, the first philosopher we discussed, comes from. So on that photo, you kind of see, and it reminds you of maybe times when you haven't seen the sea or walked along a beach and looked at the waves, that the sea can seem to have a lot of colors. And that supplies the atomists with an example that comes up in a lot of sources, and that comes to be really influential in the history of philosophy when people discuss sense perception. Namely, kind of the short version is the sea looks one color in the morning and another color in the evening. So, for example, you walk along the beach in the morning and the sea looks dark blue, but then you walk along the sea in the afternoon and it looks kind of greenish. Or maybe there's a storm and there are heavy clouds and the sea looks gray or almost black or whatever. So that kind of phenomenon supplies the Epicureans with an example for explaining how they think of sense perception. Namely, the idea is that the waves and the water and the atomic movement through void, which constitutes waves and water, is as it were sending out, emitting images that travel in the direction of perceivers. And then a perceiver, every individual perceiver, is as it were active with their sense perceptual apparatus. And that activity is itself constituted by atoms swirling through the void. So what happens is that the atomic movement of these images traveling your way and your own sense perceptual activity kind of hit each other and interact. And the product of this is the sense perception. And that is what explains that at one moment the sea looks green, and at another moment the sea looks blue, or whatever the colors are. Now, I want you to think precisely through this example and reconstruct it in your own terms by reading the texts that are assigned for this section, and then to explain by reference to these texts and sort of really pointing to the passages how it is, according to Epicurus, that the sea can look one color at a given time and another color at another time.